Hello everyone. Today we are going to learn about the important role imparted by another mineral element, that is potassium. So you see that the name potassium is derived from pot ash, and plant ash basically contains potassium comprising almost 50% of the total weight. After nitrogen, potassium is absorbed by plants in generally very large amount than any other mineral elements. Basically in plants, you see that potassium is mainly present as soluble inorganic salt, and potassium is generally, you see, abundant in young and actively growing parts of the plant, including buds, new leaves, root tips, while other tissues like would have lower concentration of potassium. Basically, plants obtain potassium from soil, minerals, organic matter, and fertilizers. Plants obtain this potassium from soil minerals, organic matter, and fertilizers, and generally potassium is not involved in building up cell components. Basically, it serves as a catalytic and regulatory functions we will explore in detail during this lecture. So you see that how potassium is taken up by the plant, you see that potassium is present in the form of salts such as potassium sulfate, in the form of phosphate, nitrate, and plants generally absorb this ion by cation exchange methods in the form of potassium cation. So generally potassium has high mobility in the plants at all levels, in individual cells, in tissues, and in long distance transport by the xylem and phloem. Integral membrane proteins like transporters and cation channels basically facilitate potassium uptake and transport throughout the plant body, allowing it to pass through the plasma membrane. In addition to this, you see that uptake of potassium by roots mainly depends on the growth rate of the plant, and after older leaves of the plant attain their typical potassium ion concentration, any net flux of potassium into the roots solely fulfills the requirement for the new growth of both roots and shoots. You see that how potassium ions are absorbed by the plant root. It is well depicted in this picture by cation exchange mechanism. Now, the basic question arises, what is the functional role of this mineral element? As we have discussed roles of other mineral elements previously, so potassium also imparts a very important functional role, like in the activation of enzyme. You see that it plays a role in various aspect of plant physiology, both at cellular and whole plant level. At cellular level, potassium functions in cell metabolism, serving as activator of enzymes, and as also acts as an essential ion for protein synthesis. We might have gone through the photosynthesis, and in the translocation of food material, respiration, and the formation of chlorophyll. In addition to this, potassium is essential for proper activity of DNA polymerase, cell division, maintaining osmotic potential, and finally movement of stomata. At the whole plant level, basically potassium regulates the opening and closing of stomata at the whole plant level, and which is very crucial for controlling gas exchange and water loss. Now, first important function played by potassium is activation of enzymes. You see that a large number of enzymes rely on or they stimulated by potassium along with other single charged cations for their activity. These ions basically trigger enzymatic activity by inducing the structural changes in the protein, and generally the alterations induced by potassium enhance the rate of catalytic reaction, generally Vmax, and in some cases also improve the affinity for the substrate, that is affects Km. So what has been observed that prolonged deficiency of potassium generally leads to reduction in cytosolic potassium concentration, and which adversely affects the activity of cytosolic enzymes. This impact basically develops not only from the absence of enzyme activation but also from the inability to maintain the optimal cytosolic pH. Pyruvate kinase and phosphofructokinase are among the most important enzymes that are sensitive to potassium deficiency. So you see that very important enzyme, starch synthase activity, which catalyze the conversion of ADP glucose into glucosyl starch. So ATP synthase activity is generally influenced by single charge cations, among which potassium is the most important and most effective. This enzyme facilitates the transfer of glucose to starch molecules, as you see that depicted in this reaction, and where basically in addition to this, potassium also activates starch synthase activity across diverse plant species and organs like leaves, seeds and tubers. However, excessive concentration of potassium could have inhibitory effects on this enzyme. Now, another crucial role of potassium is its activation of membrane-bound proton pumping ATPases. This activation not only aids in the transport of potassium from the external solution across the plasma membrane into the roots, but also establishes the potassium as the primary elements in cell extension and osmoregulation. Additionally, potassium specifically activates vacuolar pyrophosphatase isoforms, which is responsible for transporting protons into vacuoles. And it has been also seen that potassium deficiency increases the activity of certain hydrolases or oxidases, for example, polyphenol oxidase. So the alteration in the enzyme activities generally has been observed in potassium deficient plant, and generally there is a characteristic shift in the metabolic pattern in the plants facing potassium deficiency. Generally this includes elevated levels of soluble carbohydrates, especially reducing sugars and soluble organic nitrogen compounds, soluble nitrogen organic compounds, particularly nitrogen rich and positively charged amino acids. Opposite to it, concentration of nitrate, organic acids, negatively charged amino acids and pyruvate are reduced during deficiency. Now, role of potassium in protein synthesis, as I have mentioned that potassium is generally required by the plant in generally quite larger amount at higher concentration for proper protein synthesis, and you see that potassium plays a very important role in various stages of translation process, including tRNA binding to ribosomes. Basically, in C3 species, a significant portion of chloroplast protein comprise RUBP carboxylase, which we have already discussed in our previous lecture. Consequently, the synthesis of this enzyme is basically affected by potassium deficiency and responds promptly to potassium resupply. Additionally, it has also been suggested that potassium not only activates the nitrate reductase but also plays a vital role in synthesis of particularly this enzyme. Now, role of potassium in photosynthesis is very significant. So, photosynthesis is generally strongly reduced in potassium deficient leaves and affect the process of photosynthesis at various levels. The potassium levels in plant affect photosynthesis by controlling the opening and closing of stomata, and generally deficiency of potassium increases the resistance of stomata to carbon dioxide. What happens when the external concentration of potassium is raised to say for 100 millimole, and this matches the concentration of potassium in intact cell cytosol, and carbon dioxide at this juncture, carbon dioxide fixation increases almost 3 times. During the light exposure, additional potassium influx from the cytosol is generally required to maintain high pH in the stroma, which is very crucial for optimal RUBP carboxylase activity. As you see that in the leaf, the concentration of potassium decreases. Not only the rate of photosynthesis and RUBP carboxylase activity decreases, but also photorespiration. So, this decline could result from the shortage of carbon dioxide at the site of enzyme's catalytic site. You see that potassium also affects the process of osmoregulation. Basically, osmoregulation is that how plants actively manage pressure inside their cells to keep their right balance of water and electrolytes. This control pressure is generally very crucial for carrying out biochemical reactions and maintaining balance within the plants. And potassium is generally most abundant in organic solute and generally essential for in regulating the process of regulating various processes. So, this generally the potassium concentration also governs cell growth and different types of movement, including the expanding cells, opening and closing of stomata, and responding to light stimulus. Light stimulus are touch, that is photonastic and seismonastic movement. Now, what is the role of potassium in cell extension? That you see that potassium plays a very crucial role in cell extension, which involves the development of large central vacuole that almost occupies around 80 to 90% of the cell volume. And basically, there are 3 main requirements for the cell extension. First one is cell extensibility, that is rearrangement or loosening of the existing cell wall. Second one is synthesis and deposition of newly formed cell wall components, and then accumulation of solutes to create the necessary internal osmotic potential for turgor pressure. So, you see that in most cases cell extension happens due to the potassium accumulation in the cells, and generally potassium is very necessary for stabilizing the pH in both cell wall space, that is in apoplast and cytoplasm, as well as increasing the osmotic potential in the vacuoles. So, decreasing the pH in apoplast is very crucial for activating enzymes involved in loosening the cell wall, as you see in the figure. Now, very important role played by potassium we have discussed in detail while discussing the opening and closing of stomata. Just to quick reminder of the things we have discussed, you see that potassium here also plays very important role that in opening and closing of stomata, and this potassium coupled with an anion play a crucial role in altering the turgor pressure within the guard cell, which in turn generally influences the movement of stomata. What happens when the concentration of potassium increases within the guard cell? And you see in the left side that when the concentration of potassium build up in the guard cell, or you can say its concentration increases, it raises the osmotic pressure of the guard cell, prompting the uptake of water from the neighboring cells. So, this influx of water enhances basically the turgor pressure within the guard cells, leading to opening of the stomata. However, what happens in the dark, you see that the closure of stomata is generally linked to the outward movement of potassium and a subsequent decrease in the osmotic pressure of the guard cell. You see on the right side figure. The accumulation of generally potassium within the cytoplasm of the guard cells in response to light is facilitated by inward rectifying potassium channels driven by electrical potential difference established by plasma membrane bound proton pumping ATPase. As a result, what happens? The opening of stomata is preceded by reduction in the pH of the guard cell apoplast. In just to oppose the electrical potential, potassium is then transported into the vacuole via the proton driven antiporter. So, to maintain the equilibrium, what happens? You see in the figure that accumulation of potassium within the vacuoles requires the presence of counter anions, primarily malate ions or colloid ions. Depending upon the type of plant species and the concentration of colloid in the surrounding guard cell. So, what happens? The transport of colloid into the cytoplasm of the guard cell involves colloid proton symporter at the plasma membrane and in line with the electrical potential anion channels across the tonoplast into the vacuoles. So, this is how potassium impart its role in a very crucial process of the opening and closing of the stomata. Now, role of potassium is also very important. You see in the photonastic and seismonastic movement. Basically, the motion of the leaves and leaflets result from reversible changes in turgor pressure within the specialized tissues known as motor organs or pulvini. So, what happens? These changes in basically turgor pressure leads to concentration and expansion of the cells in different regions, namely extensor and flexor of the motor organs. You might have gone through, and basically here the key solutes like potassium, colloid and malate play a very significant role in the osmoregulation, influencing the movement of water across the membrane matrix, especially through aquaporins. So, you see that how potassium play a role in photonastic and seismonastic movements in the leaves and leaflets of the plants. Now, in addition to this, potassium also play a very important role in maintaining the equilibrium as the primary positive ion which generally balances out negative ions in various parts of the plant cell such as the cytoplasm and chloroplast. So, basically potassium frequently serves this role for both stationary and mobile negative ions found in the vacuoles, xylem and phloem. So, what happens? The buildup of organic acid ions in plant tissues often occurs when potassium is generally transported out into the cytoplasm without accompanying negative ions, especially in root or guard cells. In addition to this, potassium plays a very crucial role in balancing the positive and negative ions in nitrate metabolism, where it is commonly acts as a primary counter ions for nitrate during the long distance transport in the xylem and for storage in the vacuoles. Now, you see that once plant faces any sort of deficiency symptom of potassium, it will be visibly reflected and could be observed by the person who are growing any sort of crop. So, you see that initially we have discussed that Uh, Basically, potassium, if deficient in the soil, generally like nitrogen and phosphorus, you see that they are redistributed in case of facing sort of deficiency. Potassium can also be redistributed from mature to younger organs. So, basically deficiency symptom of potassium basically first manifest in the older leaves, not in the younger leaves, because of the redistribution of potassium. So, basically deficiency symptom of potassium includes necrosis or interveinal chlorosis, scorched leaf tips as you see in the figure in the cannabis plant, and having short nodes, internodes. So, internodes become very short and it develops the necrosis and interveinal chlorosis. And in addition to this, potassium deficiency can result in loss of apical dominance and cambial activity due to its high solubility in water, leading to cambial, it basically loss of apical dominance and cambial activity due to its high solubility in water, leading to leaching out of the rocky or sandy soil. So, generally during the deficiency of potassium, plant could face a higher risk of pathogen attack, wilting, chlorosis, brown spotting, and susceptibility to damage from frost and heat. You might have seen that in most monocot, generally necrosis typically begins at the tips and margins of the leaf, progressing precipitally along the margins towards the younger and lower parts of the leaf bases. You see that cereals like maize develops a weak stalk during potassium deficiency with easily infected roots, leading to root rot and eventual lodging up plants due to wind and rains. You see in the figure that one is banana plant, another one is corn plant. So, you see that older leaves become chlorotic, then further necrotic, and the tip of the midrib bends downward in case of potassium deficiency. You see on the lower side, corn plant is growing which is deficient in potassium. So, the leaf margins of the older leaves become chlorotic and then necrotic. So, visual symptoms of potassium deficiency, you see that in all these figures you have observed that in cannabis as well as in banana and corn, that the visual deficiency first encountered on the lower parts of the plant, not at the growing region of the plant. So, if there is initial deficiency of potassium, it could be easily observed by seeing that which part it is going to affect. So, farmers could identify the deficiency of potassium by visually observing once they encounter chlorosis and then necrosis at the margins of the leaf. Now, opposite to deficiency, if there is excess of potassium in plants, which could lead to toxicity symptoms. If soil is supplied with excess quantity of potassium, it could generate toxicity in the plants. So, toxicity symptom include, you see in the figure, marginal leaf scorching, leaf tip burn and marginal leaf necrosis. So, what happens when high level of potassium could reduce the uptake of other essential nutrients, leading to imbalance in plant nutrition. So, plant may exhibit symptoms of wilting and dehydration despite sufficient water availability due to potassium toxicity. And in addition to this, potassium toxicity can also impair root development and overall growth, plant growth, ultimately reducing yield and quality. and in very severe cases excessive potassium could lead to death of the plant. So this is all about role of potassium and the specific deficiency symptoms that develop generally in the plant, and this is all about the potassium. Thank you very much.